I was 7 when my father vanished. Not the dramatic kind of vanishing you see in movies, with ransom notes or signs of struggle. He just disappeared. One ordinary Tuesday morning, his truck was found abandoned on the side of Highway 16, keys still in the ignition. His wallet sitting on the passenger seat. That's all we got, an empty truck and a lifetime of questions. My name is Harper, and that morning changed everything. I remember standing in our small living room, clutching my teddy bear while 2 police officers spoke to my mother in hushed tones. Mom's face remained composed, but her hands kept fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. "Mrs. Quinn will keep investigating, but right now there's no evidence of foul play," one officer said, his notepad already halfway into his pocket. The other one kept glancing at me with that awful mix of pity and discomfort adults get around children in crisis. Mom nodded mechanically, thanking them as they left. The moment the door closed, she slid down against it, silent tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat next to her and held her hand. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The next few weeks were a blur of whispered phone calls and concerned neighbors bringing casseroles we barely touched. Mom threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts at the diner and starting a cleaning job on weekends. I learned to pack my own lunch and set my alarm clock. "Your mother's so strong," people would say, their voices dripping with sympathy. But I saw how she'd pause sometimes, staring at Dad's coffee mug still hanging on its hook in the kitchen. Or how she'd wake up in the middle of the night to check his side of the closet, as if his clothes might have mysteriously reappeared. One evening, about 3 months after he disappeared, I found Mom in the garage, sitting in Dad's old workshop. She was holding his favorite wrench, running her fingers over the worn handle. "Harper, sweetie," she said, noticing me hovering in the doorway. "Come here." She patted the workbench beside her, and I climbed up. "You know your daddy loved us very much, right?" I nodded, even though I wasn't so sure anymore. "If he loved us, why didn't he come back?" "Sometimes." Mom paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people leave, and we might never know why. But that doesn't mean it's our fault. You understand." I didn't, not really, but I nodded again because it seemed like what she needed. "We're going to be okay," she said more to herself than to me. "We've got each other, and that's what matters." That night, I overheard her on the phone with Aunt Sarah. "The bank called again," Mom whispered. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up with the mortgage. And these medical bills from his last checkup." I had no idea he'd canceled his life insurance. I lay in bed, clutching my teddy bear tighter, trying to make sense of it all. Dad had always seemed so happy, so present. He'd swing me around in the backyard, calling me his little monkey. He'd spend hours teaching me about tools in his workshop, letting me hold the flashlight while he fixed things. How could someone just walk away from their life without a trace? Years later, I'd learned that the police found something else in his truck that day, something they didn't tell us about initially. A receipt from a gas station in Oregon, dated 2 days after he disappeared. He hadn't vanished into thin air after all. He'd chosen to leave. But that morning, watching those police officers walk away, I was just a confused 7-year-old girl, unaware that this was only the beginning of a pattern that would shape my entire life. People leaving, secrets unraveling, and the constant struggle to keep myself from falling apart in the aftermath. 11 years passed in a blur of late-night study sessions, part-time jobs, and my mother's unwavering determination to give me a normal life. But nothing prepares you for hearing the word cancer in a sterile doctor's office. Watching your mother's face as she processes the news with the same quiet strength she showed the day Dad left. I was 18, fresh out of high school and ready to start college on a scholarship when Mom's persistent cough turned into something more sinister. Stage 3 lung cancer. She'd never even smoked. "It's just another bump in the road, honey," Mom said, squeezing my hand as we left the hospital. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've handled worse. But this was different." The medical bills started piling up faster than the autumn leaves in our yard. I'd come home from my evening shift at the campus coffee shop to find Mom hunched over spreadsheets at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible numbers work. "You should defer college for a year," she suggested one evening, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. The chemotherapy had taken her hair, but not her spirit. "Focus on work, save some money." I shook my head, already knowing where this conversation was heading. Not happening. I can handle both. Harper. Mom, please. I pulled out the chair next to her, sitting down. You've spent the last 11 years making sure I had every opportunity possible. Don't ask me to give up now. She started crying then, silent tears rolling down her hollow cheeks. I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around. I grabbed her hand, noticing how thin her fingers had become. We take care of each other. That's what we do. The next few months became a brutal routine. Classes in the morning, hospital visits in the afternoon, work in the evening, and studying late into the night. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and vending machine coffee. My scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, the medical bills, the mortgage, the groceries, came down to careful juggling and prayer. Then came the night that changed everything. I was closing up the coffee shop when my phone rang. Mom had collapsed at home. Our elderly neighbor found her when she went to drop off some soup. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I ran toward her room. The doctor's words blurred together. Complications, pneumonia, critical condition. I stood there, watching the machines breathe for her, remembering all the times she'd been strong for me. You should rest, a nurse said gently, touching my arm. She's stable for now. I shook my head. I need to be here when she wakes up. But she didn't wake up. 3 days later, I had to make the decision no 18-year-old should have to make. The doctor explained that her organs were failing, that the cancer had spread more aggressively than they'd thought, that keeping her on life support would only prolong the inevitable. She left this for you, the nurse said, handing me an envelope after it was over. Inside was a letter, written in Mom's careful handwriting. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry I couldn't be stronger for you. But you need to know something. You were never the one who needed to be strong. You were my strength all along. Every time I wanted to give up, every time the weight felt too heavy, I'd look at you and find the courage to keep going. Don't let this break you. Don't let anything break you. You're a Quinn woman, and we bend but never break. All my love, Mom. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my pocket. The world felt impossibly large and empty, but I could still hear Mom's voice in my head. We bend but never break. That night, sitting alone in our too-quiet house, I made 2 promises to myself. First, I would finish college, no matter what it took. And second, I would never let anyone make me feel as helpless as I felt in that hospital corridor. Little did I know, both these promises would be tested sooner than I expected. I met Ryan in my advanced economics class, 6 months after Mom died. He sat next to me on a rainy Tuesday, offered me a coffee, and somehow made me laugh for the first time since the funeral. It wasn't love at first sight, more like recognition. Here was someone else who understood what it meant to navigate life's unexpected turns. You're taking 18 credits and working 2 jobs? He asked one evening as we studied in the library. That's insane, Harper. I shrugged, highlighting another passage in my textbook. Not much choice. The scholarship only covers tuition. There's always a choice. He closed my book, forcing me to look at him. Let me help. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's... He ran a hand through his dark hair, frustrated. It's me caring about someone who's working herself to death. That's when my scholarship renewal letter arrived. Or rather, the rejection letter. I stood in my tiny studio apartment, reading and rereading the words until they blurred together. Without the scholarship, there was no way I could continue. All of Mom's sacrifices, all my promises, they'd amount to nothing. Move in with me, Ryan said when I told him. We were sitting in his car outside my apartment, rain drumming on the roof. My roommate's graduating early. You can take his room, split the rent. It's cheaper than this place. Ryan. Just listen, he interrupted. You're brilliant, Harper. You're going to graduate and become some hotshot financial analyst, and I'll get to say I knew you when. But you can't do it if you're sleeping 3 hours a night and living on ramen. I stared out the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Why are you doing this? Because someone should. His voice softened. Because you've been carrying everything alone for so long, you've forgotten you don't have to. 2 weeks later, I moved into Ryan's apartment. It was bigger than mine, closer to campus, and somehow everything started feeling manageable. Ryan cooked while I studied. We split the bills. For the first time since Mom died, I felt like I could breathe. But then came the night that changed everything. I was working late at my campus job when Ryan called, panic in his voice.
Harper, we need you.
There's been an accident. I found him in the emergency room, blood on his shirt, looking shell-shocked. It's my dad, he explained. Heart attack. Mom's with him now. I stayed with Ryan all night, watching him pace the waiting room, making coffee runs, holding his hand when the doctor finally came out. His father survived, but barely. That's when I met Evelyn Mitchell for the first time. She swept into the waiting room like a hurricane in designer clothes, her mascara perfectly intact despite the circumstances. Her eyes landed on our joined hands, then on my worn jeans and coffee-stained sweater. You must be Harper, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Ryan's friend. Girlfriend, Ryan corrected, squeezing my hand. She's been here all night, Mom. How sweet. Her tone suggested it was anything but. Richard's asking for you, darling. Family only right now. I felt Ryan tense beside me. Harper is family. Of course she is. Evelyn's smile turned sharp. But perhaps she should go home and change? We wouldn't want the hospital staff thinking we're. Well, the implication hung in the air. I stood up, gathering my things. But Ryan caught my arm. Stay, he whispered. Please. I looked at him, then at Evelyn, who was watching us with calculated interest. In that moment, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach turn, a flash of the same controlling nature that had driven my father away, that had made my mother doubt herself for years. It's okay, I said, squeezing Ryan's hand. Go be with your dad. I'll come back later. As I walked out of the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just glimpsed my future, a future where every decision, every moment would be scrutinized and judged by Evelyn Mitchell. I should have listened to that instinct. Should have run while I still could. But I was too focused on not losing another person I loved to see the warning signs right in front of me. Ryan proposed on graduation day, right after we received our diplomas. It wasn't a grand gesture, just us sitting on the steps of the economics building where we first met. The ring was simple, elegant, exactly what I would have chosen myself. I know it's not much, he said, looking nervous. But I promise, Harper, I'll spend my life making sure you never feel alone again. I said yes without hesitation. After 2 years together, Ryan felt like home. Steady, reliable, everything my father wasn't. We planned a small wedding, something we could afford on our entry-level salaries. That's when Evelyn stepped in. Darling, she said during what was supposed to be a casual dinner at her house, you simply can't get married at the courthouse. What would everyone think? Ryan squeezed my hand under the table. Mom, we've talked about this. We want something simple. Simple doesn't mean cheap. She sipped her wine, eyes fixed on me. Unless, of course, Harper's uncomfortable with accepting help from family. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. We appreciate the offer, but I insist. Her tone left no room for argument. Consider it my wedding gift. After all, you're going to be a Mitchell now. Ryan beamed, missing the way his mother's words made me flinch. I wasn't becoming a Mitchell. I was still a Quinn, my mother's daughter. But I stayed quiet, not wanting to spoil his happiness. The wedding spiraled into something unrecognizable. Evelyn took over, booking an expensive venue, ordering custom everything. Each time I tried to object, she'd already paid for something else, making it impossible to back out without seeming ungrateful. The night before the wedding, I found myself alone in the bridal suite, staring at my reflection. The dress was beautiful, and completely not me. Everything about this wedding felt like a performance for Evelyn's social circle. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. You okay? You seemed off at the rehearsal dinner. I started typing I'm fine but deleted it. Instead, I wrote, remember when we were kids and promised to tell each other the truth, no matter what? Her response came quickly. What's really going on, Harper? Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn swept in, carrying a small box. I have something for you, she said, opening it to reveal a pearl necklace. It's been in the Mitchell family for generations. Every bride has worn it. The pearls gleamed in the soft light, beautiful and suffocating. I was planning to wear my mother's locket. Evelyn's smile tightened. Oh, sweetie, That old thing? This is your chance to start fresh, to become part of a real family. The words hit like a physical blow. I had a real family. Of course you did. Her tone was patronizing. But let's be honest. A father who abandoned you, a mother who couldn't even afford proper health care. Ryan's offering you something better. Don't cling to the past. I stood up, hands shaking. My mother worked herself to death to give me a future. Don't you dare. And now you have one, she interrupted smoothly. Thanks to my son. Just remember that. After she left, I sat on the floor, clutching my mother's locket. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger in her expensive dress and perfect makeup. Mom's words echoed in my head, "Don't let anything break you." My phone buzzed again. "Zoe, whatever you decide, I've got your back." I took a deep breath and made a decision. I couldn't stop this wedding without hurting Ryan, but I could hold on to who I was. Tomorrow, I would walk down the aisle wearing my mother's locket, not Evelyn's pearls. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt like drawing a line in the sand. What I didn't know then was that this moment, this choice between my identity and Evelyn's vision of who I should be, was just the beginning of a war I wasn't prepared to fight. 3 years into our marriage, the cracks started showing. While my career in financial analysis took off, Ryan seemed content working retail at the mall, picking up occasional shifts and spending more time at his mother's house than ours. I got the promotion, I announced over dinner one night, unable to contain my excitement. Senior analyst position, with a significant raise. Ryan pushed his food around his plate. That's great. Great? Ryan, this is huge. We can finally start saving for. Mom thinks we should look at houses in Oakwood Heights, he interrupted, not meeting my eyes. Sit down, my faculty. Oakwood Heights was where Evelyn lived, all massive houses and manicured lawns. We can't afford Oakwood Heights. With your new salary, even with the raise, those houses are way beyond our means. I tried keeping my voice level. Besides, our apartment is fine. Fine isn't good enough anymore. He finally looked up. Mom says people are starting to talk. People? You mean your mother's country club friends? The words came out sharper than intended. Since when do we care what they think? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Evelyn, right on cue. I watched him answer, watched his posture change as he spoke to her. When had my confident, supportive husband become this person who couldn't make a decision without his mother's input? The next day, I came home to find Ryan and Evelyn in our living room, surrounded by real estate brochures. Harper, darling. Evelyn's smile was razor sharp. I found the perfect house for you. 5 bedrooms, pool, guest house, room to grow. We don't need 5 bedrooms. I dropped my briefcase, exhausted from a day of meetings. And we definitely don't need a guest house. Don't be silly. Every Mitchell lives in Oakwood Heights. It's tradition. I'm not. I caught myself seeing Ryan's pleading look. We need to discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Ryan said, his voice taking on that familiar tone he used when parroting his mother's words. I already put in an offer. The room went silent. You what? It's a seller's market, Evelyn chimed in. We had to move quickly. Don't worry about the down payment. I'm handling it. My hands started shaking. Ryan, can we talk? Alone. In our bedroom, I tried staying calm. You made an offer on a house without discussing it with me? Mom says. I don't care what your mother says. The words exploded out of me. This is our life, our finances. You can't just. What's the problem? He threw his hands up. You got this big promotion, we're moving up in the world. Isn't this what you wanted? What I wanted. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. What I wanted was a partner who could make decisions with me, not for me. What I wanted was to build our life together, not live the life your mother designed. You're being dramatic. Mom's just trying to help. Help. I pulled out my laptop, opened our banking app. Look at this. Really look. Even with my raise, that house would eat up everything we make. One emergency and we'd be underwater. Mom said she'd help if. And there it is. I closed the laptop. More strings for your mother to pull. When did you stop being the man I married and become her puppet? His face hardened. At least my mother's still around to help. The words hit like a physical blow. I stepped back, remembering my mother's last days, how she'd fought to give me independence, not control. Your mother's not helping, Ryan. She's buying your obedience. And apparently, it's pretty cheap. I grabbed my keys and jacket, needing to escape before I said something unforgivable. As I passed the living room, Evelyn called out, "Don't be difficult, dear. This is for the best." I paused at the door, thinking of all the times my mother had taught me to stand my ground. "No, Evelyn. This is for your best." And that's not the same thing at all. Walking to my car, I called Zoe. "Remember when you said you had a spare room if I ever needed it?" "Always," she answered without hesitation. "How soon?" I looked back at our apartment, where Ryan stood watching from the window. "I don't know yet. But soon." The call came at 3 in the morning. Richard Mitchell had suffered another heart attack, worse than the first. I woke to find Ryan already dressed, keys in hand. "I have to go," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Dad needs me." I nodded, still half asleep. "Of course. Let me get dressed." "No." His voice was firm. "I need to do this alone." That was 6 months ago. Now I stood in our empty house, the house I'd warned him we couldn't afford, staring at another past due notice. Ryan had quit his job to help care for his father, leaving me to shoulder our mounting debts alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Family dinner tonight." No excuses. Family dinner. Her new Sunday tradition, where she'd spend hours listing everything Ryan had sacrificed for his father, while pointedly ignoring the fact that I was working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat. "I can't make it," I texted back. "Deadline at work." Her response was immediate. "Ryan needs your support. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word echoed in my head as I drove to their house that evening. The same words she'd used when I suggested Ryan look for part-time work. When I questioned her decision to hire round-the-clock nurses we couldn't afford, when I dared to mention our growing credit card debt. Ryan met me at the door, looking more like his mother's son than my husband. "You're late." "Traffic." I followed him inside, where Evelyn was holding court in the living room, surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms. "Harper, darling." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We need to discuss the house." "What about it?" "Well," she paused, examining her manicure. "Given the circumstances, it might be best to sell it." The room tilted slightly. "Sell our house." "Ryan needs to be here full-time," she continued. "And since you're so concerned about money." "I'm concerned about surviving," I corrected. "We're drowning in debt because..." "Because you lack faith," she interrupted. "Family takes care of family. Ryan understands that." I looked at my husband, but he was studying the carpet. "Ryan? Is this what you want?" "It makes sense," he mumbled. "Dad needs me here." "And what about what I need?" The words came out before I could stop them. "I've been killing myself trying to keep us above water while you..." "While I what?" His head snapped up. "While I take care of my dying father. I'm sorry we can't all be cold and practical like you." The accusation hit like a slap. "Cold?" "I watched my mother die alone because we couldn't afford proper care. Don't you dare call me cold." "That's different," Evelyn interjected smoothly. "We're not going to abandon Richard the way your father abandoned." "Stop." My voice shook. "Just stop." I walked to the window, watching the expensive landscaping blur through sudden tears. Behind me, I heard Ryan sigh. "Maybe Mom's right," he said quietly. "Maybe we should sell the house. You could get an apartment closer to work, and I could stay here." And there it was. The final thread snapping. "You've already moved out, haven't you?" I turned to face him. "Your clothes, your things, they're all here." His silence was answer enough. "Harper," Evelyn started, but I held up a hand. "No. You win, Evelyn. You finally have him exactly where you want him. Dependent, compliant, just like when he was a child." I pulled my house keys from my purse. "Let them fall onto the coffee table." "But I won't stay to watch." "Don't be dramatic," Ryan protested. "This is temporary." "No, it's not." I met his eyes one last time. "This is who you choose to be. And I choose not to be part of it." Walking out of that house felt like leaving my mother's hospital room all over again. That same hollow ache. That same knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. But this time, the person I was losing had chosen to leave. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from my bank. Insufficient funds for mortgage payment. Final notice. I started the engine, wondering how I'd ended up here, homeless, nearly bankrupt and completely alone. Again. Richard Mitchell died on a Tuesday, exactly like my father had disappeared. But this time, I wasn't a helpless child watching my world collapse. I was in my office when Ryan's text arrived. Dad's gone. Need you home now. Home. I stared at the word, wondering if he meant our house or his mother's. It didn't matter. I'd lost both. I found them in the kitchen of our house, Ryan and Evelyn huddled over papers spread across the counter I'd picked out 3 years ago. They didn't hear me come in. The house should sell quickly, Evelyn was saying. The market's hot, and with your father's life insurance. What house? My voice made them both jump. Our house. Ryan at least had the decency to look guilty. Harper, I can explain. Explain what? How you're selling our house without telling me. Or how you're counting money your father hasn't even been dead a day. Don't be crude, Evelyn snapped. We're being practical. Something you claim to understand. I moved closer, scanning the papers. Property listings, bank statements, and is that my signature? Ryan paled. I had to, the bank needed. You forged my signature? The room tilted dangerously. On what? Just some paperwork to get the sale moving. Evelyn waved dismissively. Really, Harper, you're making this more dramatic than necessary. Get out. My voice was surprisingly steady. Both of you, get out of my house. Your house. Evelyn laughed. Darling, who do you think has been making the payments these past 6 months? I have. Every single one. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Want to see the transfers? The overtime hours? The credit card debt I took on while your son played dutiful caretaker. Mom's been helping, Ryan protested. She's been lying. I met Evelyn's eyes. Haven't you? There's no life insurance, is there? The slight twitch in her perfectly composed face told me everything. Richard canceled it years ago. I continued, watching her mask slip. Just like my father did. You've been promising Ryan money that doesn't exist. How dare you? I work in financial analysis, remember? The job you thought was beneath your precious son? I know how to read between the lines. I turned to Ryan. She's broke. Has been for years. All those country club memberships, designer clothes, it's all smoke and mirrors. That's ridiculous, Ryan stammered. Mom. But Evelyn's silence was damning. Get out, I repeated. You have 30 minutes to take what's yours. After that, I'm calling the police about the forgery. You wouldn't, Evelyn hissed. I pulled out my mother's locket, the one I'd worn instead of Evelyn's pearls at my wedding. My mother taught me to stand my ground. Your son might have forgotten who he is, but I haven't forgotten who I am. Ryan, Evelyn turned to her son. Are you going to let her speak to me this way? I watched my husband, the boy who'd offered me coffee on a rainy Tuesday, the man who'd promised to never let me feel alone, crumble under his mother's gaze. We should go, he mumbled. If you walk out that door, I said quietly, don't come back. He paused, hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the Ryan I'd fallen in love with. Then Evelyn touched his arm, and it vanished. I'm sorry, he whispered and followed his mother out. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by their abandoned papers, feeling an odd sense of déjà vu. Once again, I was watching someone choose to leave. But this time, I wasn't the scared little girl clutching a teddy bear. This time, I was choosing to. My phone buzzed, a text from Zoe. You okay? I looked around the kitchen at the life Ryan and I had built and the ruins Evelyn had made of it. No, I typed back. But I will be. Then I started gathering evidence for my lawyer. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. After all, I was my mother's daughter, and she taught me how to fight back. 1 year later, I was sorting through the last box from my old house when my phone lit up with a familiar number. Ryan. I watched it ring, remembering the last time I'd seen him in court 6 months ago, when the judge ordered him and Evelyn to repay the money they'd taken from my accounts. You should answer it, Zoe said from her spot on my new couch. After everything, she'd helped me find this small but sunny apartment across town, get closure or whatever. I picked up on the final ring. Hello. Harper. Ryan's voice was rough, unfamiliar. I need your help. Of course he did. The lawsuit had revealed the extent of Evelyn's deception. Decades of hidden debt, mortgages on mortgages. Credit cards maxed out to maintain their facade of wealth. Last I'd heard, They'd lost everything. I'm sorry, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. But I can't. Please. Mom's. She's not handling things well. We're staying in this motel, and… Stop. I closed my eyes, remembering my mother's voice. We bend but never break. You made your choice, Ryan. I know. I know I messed up. But you're the only one who understands about family. No, I interrupted. I understand about strength. About standing on your own 2 feet. That's what real family taught me. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he whispered, I miss you. I miss who you were, I replied. But that person's gone. After hanging up, I reached into the box I'd been sorting, the last one from my old life. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was my mother's jewelry box. I'd avoided opening it since her death, but something compelled me now. Among the modest pieces she'd owned, I found an envelope I'd never seen before. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before she died. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this, you've finally decided to face what's in this box. You always were brave like that, facing things head-on, even when it hurt. I need to tell you something about your father. The police found more than just that receipt from Oregon. They found letters, dozens of them, to another family he'd abandoned before us. It seems running away was his pattern. But that's not your pattern, Harper. You stay. You fight. You build something real from the ruins others leave behind. Whatever life throws at you, remember, your worth isn't measured by who stays or goes. It's measured by how you carry yourself through the storm. All my love. Mom. I traced her handwriting, feeling pieces click into place. My father hadn't just abandoned us. We were part of a pattern, a chain of destruction he'd left in his wake. But Mom had broken that pattern by staying, by showing me a different kind of strength. You okay? Zoe asked, watching me carefully. I looked around my new apartment, smaller than my old house, but paid for with honest work. On the wall hung my financial analyst certification, earned while rebuilding my credit after Ryan's betrayal. The coffee table held brochures for the financial literacy program I'd started, helping other women escape financially abusive relationships. Yeah, I said, tucking Mom's letter into my journal. I really am. My phone buzzed again, Ryan's number. This time, I didn't hesitate. Block contact. Some might call it revenge, letting Ryan and Evelyn face the consequences of their choices. But sitting there, surrounded by the life I'd built from scratch, I realized it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about breaking patterns, the pattern of abandonment my father set, the pattern of control Evelyn wielded, the pattern of dependency Ryan chose. I picked up my mother's locket, the one I'd worn at my wedding, and fastened it around my neck. Inside were 2 pictures now, Mom on one side, and on the other, a photo of me at my program's first graduation ceremony, helping other women find their strength. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better.